Hi, folks. Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and today I'm going to answer another question in our freelancing Q&A series from my basement office here in now actually sunny Hood River, Oregon, where it has not been sunny for 2 weeks, and just today it is. So that's cool, and hopefully my lighting is good. In honor of today's question, I am wearing my C Sharp. That was not at all on purpose. I'm just kidding. But it just so happens I'm going to be talking about freelance programming while wearing a shirt of a programming language. So that seems like a nice serendipitous thing. And today's question is, oh, I scrolled past the title. Can or will ChatGPT replace freelance programming? I have tried to avoid doing content about ChatGPT for as long as humanly possible, but about a month ago, I did get this question from a friend of mine, actually. And it seems like this subject is ubiquitous and unavoidable. And I don't know, maybe people will find this interesting. So, can or will ChatGPT replace freelance programming? So the answer to that is no. Let me start out here. This has come up in our circle community as well a little bit, but old man time. I went and got an undergraduate degree in computer science a little over 20 years ago from Carnegie Mellon University. Go Tartans. And I was in that program from 1998 to 2001. At that time, I took a bunch of coursework in things like artificial intelligence and robotics because, believe it or not, I didn't grow up wanting to own a marketing business. I actually had ambitions to do interesting things with my life. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. At that time, when I took that coursework, we learned a lot about the relatively nascent subject of machine learning, robotics, degrees of freedom. These were pretty interesting subjects. Obviously, given that it was a CS program, the stuff that I did was largely academic in this sphere. And this kind of immersed me into this world of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And the thing I discovered 20 years ago and that has remained true ever since is how wildly what a large gulf there is between what people think kind of colloquially about artificial intelligence and machine learning and what it actually involves. So there is this gap, and I think we fill it in with the stuff of like science fiction and imagination and so on and so forth. And that has perhaps never been true more than when we anthropomorphize artificial intelligences. Like back then, nobody would have been able to create anything that sort of felt even remotely human in the form of like a chatbot, let alone this ChatGPT one that I'm not sure whether it passes the Turing test or not. It sure seems like it could, and that would have been a remarkable feat 20 years ago, probably Nobel Prize worthy. Now it just seems like, fodder for nonsense on the internet. But what happens when you have something that is seeming to pass the Turing test and you anthropomorphize it, meaning it feels human to you, is that you have a tendency to dramatically overestimate its humanity and its capabilities and its intelligence. And so there's just this runaway sense that suddenly there's this magical robot that's even smarter than Deep Blue or I'm not going to say her name or she'll start talking to me, Amazon's, blue device thing. We've got the next generation of that, and everybody is just assuming that it's going to take over the world, I guess, replace your job and mine and everyone else's. And anyway, people have been saying that for 20 years about every development in artificial intelligence. Everybody's job is, for the last 20 years, as best I can tell, just on the cusp of being replaced by robots and AIs. Also, they're going to take over the world. Also, it's so scary what they're yada, yada, yada. I don't really think this one personally is any different from anything I've seen. Sure, they're getting more sophisticated. Yes, it can do a pretty good job of writing passively interesting text. On the flip side of this, it can also, make up nonsense with complete confidence, and it will not know the difference or tell you about the difference. There's no, I don't know, maybe they're coming out with it, but no like confidence interval in what it tells you. It just draws on its own summation of the internet and gives you some facts and also some nonsense. And that's what this technology is. I also think it's maybe no coincidence that just as the whole crypto fever dream finally blew up and mercifully went away, that we now have a new fever dream. I would not personally read into it as some kind of revolutionary thing that's really going to replace anyone or anything all that much. But that's just my take, and I am not Nostradamus. So I could be wrong. We have been for Hit Subscribe investigating like certain uses of it from an R&D perspective. It is kind of interesting. It's fun to play with. I'm not knocking it. It's legitimately cool. But I think there is some serious hyperbole going around here. For the subject of programming specifically, where this came from is I've got up in another monitor. I'm not screen sharing, but my friend sent me this thing it's got this guy named Joe Perkins on Twitter saying, last night I used GPT-4 to write code for five microservices for a new product. A parenthetically very good dev quoted £5,000 and 2 weeks, I guess, for this effort. GPT-4 delivered the same thing in 3 hours for 11 cents. I guess it switched currencies on him. It is genuinely mind-boggling. And then he goes on to describe what these microservices did and what this product does. So one of them, an example program, I guess this is what he's calling a microservice further down in this tweet thread, is it takes a startup's URL as input. It then scrapes the website copy and stores the result. It uses OpenAI DaVinci to summarize the website and provide an overview of what the startup does. It outputs the summary, and it even provides steps in how to run it in Replit. So let's recap that for a moment. What ChatGPT has done here is curl, go and get the text at a URL, and then it's taken that text and put it into a different tool, and then outputted the result of that. So on the one hand, I guess it's cool that it wrote some Python to do that. But on the other hand, this microservice is something that you probably could have done with if this, then that, or other cobbled together no-code tools for a long time. So I don't really see any new ground being covered here per se. Taking a bunch of text and shoving it into some other tool doesn't seem especially labor intensive or interesting or probably even worth doing. I'm not really sure what the point of Joe's service is here. The service that I guess reads a web page and then tells you what it's about. Somebody's probably got a use for that somewhere, I guess. Another example, take a GitHub repo and generate a summary of what the repo does in a way that a non-technical person can understand. Again, I'm not really sure what his tool does here that copy and paste into whatever he's using to summarize it couldn't do. So I guess what I'm getting at is on the surface, this seems impressive, at least if you don't actually dig into what he's asking ChatGPT to do. Once you do that, something doesn't quite add up here. I would be curious to know who this very good dev is that is charging $5,000 for what should probably be just advising Joe that none of this is worth bothering to do. So I could have told him not to bother with this microservice or startup for free. I don't even charge you for that one, Joe. Just don't. Move on to something valuable. I don't mean to be overly like snarky or sarcastic about this, but this kind of like runaway breathless hyperbole seems to me what's really dotting the landscape here. And frankly, I think the only thing that this like set of tweets reveals is something that's been true for a long time, which is new low or no code type technology comes out, or ChatGPT in this case, and people who don't know anything about programming or commissioning programming or what the value of programmers is, breathlessly assume that suddenly programmers are done. By the way, ever since I've been a programmer, like 20 years, I've also been seeing usually non-programmers talk about how insert technology here was going to be the death of programming, or like kind of the stoner-tastic moment. I remember 10, 15 years ago, somebody saying to me like, man, I think we're right on the precipice of writing a program that writes programs, and thinking like, bro, that's deep. It's not happening. So I think this is kind of emblematic of the discussion though. But it's been going on for a long time. There's always something coming around that's going to change everything. People always get like wildly over enthusiastic about it and then don't really think about the devil being in the details. So I might be overly dismissive of this. I don't know. I haven't like looked at the Python code that was apparently generated here, but nothing about this sounds new or particularly interesting to me. And I think, for a freelance programmer out there, and perhaps other disciplines as well, it's worth zooming out and examining your real value, because people have been trying to, especially people with a vision, let's call it, like Joe here, have been trying to replace programming with all kinds of crap forever. I mean, I can't tell you how many early in my career, and probably be even true to this day, how many Microsoft Office based solutions I have cleaned up over the years, where somebody who is not a programmer, and kudos to them for their inventiveness, but built some monstrosity in Microsoft Access or Excel or what have you, one lookup DIY, backend macro at a time. And this is true of, in thinking of line of business type applications. Non-technical people are always like, oh man, you could do this with Zapier. And I'm like, oh God, please don't. We don't need magic on the internet stringing together business processes. So my point is, people come up with these ways, ChatGPT or otherwise, of trying to replace programmers, or being convinced that programming and automation isn't really necessary. And to some degree, in a very limited and Faustian way, they tend to succeed. They create this database in MS Access, they create this Microsoft Excel-based automation, and they get the job done for a period of time. But I call it a Faustian bargain because, yes, it technically sort of does what they wanted to for the moment. And the more and more a business becomes dependent on things like this, the more and more horrific the consequences when you try to figure out how it works or change it, or when that person leaves and nobody has any idea how any of it works. And I just don't see asking a chat bot to do your programming for you being any better than any of the rest of these types of solutions at this kind of thing. And so, kind of shifting gears and talking about what your value is as a freelance programmer, if you think there's even a chance you could be replaced by ChatGPT, you need to really rethink your service delivery, because it means that you're doing something for your clients that's so simple Joe can explain it to a bot and get something he likes in the course of 11 seconds or whatever he said. Meaning, like, generate a thing that hits this AI with a get call. And if that's all you're doing for your clients, and if, like this potentially apocryphal, very good dev, you're quoting $5,000 a week for it, you need to change something about what you're doing, ChatGPT or no, because you're not doing right by your customers, and you are doing something that is incredibly easy to commodify. If your work, in a less cartoonish sense, maybe you're finding that you're earning a living doing something like rebuilding the same forms over data kind of stuff with like slight variance, or you're just doing a bunch of things where you're going around making basic calls to the same API again and again and sorting the list. If that's how you're earning your living, then yes, a framework or theoretically ChatGPT might be leveraged to eliminate you, but it won't be, because like Isaac Asimov's vision comes true and you're being replaced by clever robots. It'll be because you're doing something that's so easily commodified that it can be replaced by simple SOPs. So when you think about your freelance practice and what you're doing when you're programming for clients, it isn't just banging out template code. I mean, you're selling business to them. You're going to be having meetings with them where you listen to and understand what they're doing. During the course of this discovery, if like Joe, they're doing something that's so basic it either A, shouldn't be done, or B, can be done with existing tooling, or C, could be done with just a few lines of code in a REPL, then I would argue you have a borderline professional obligation to explain that to Joe and say, either don't do this, or here's how you can do it in 5 minutes and leave me out of it. Or if you're going to do that, why don't you just use Zapier or whatever? You have this kind of duty, I think, to clients to give them good advice. Your role isn't just to bang out code like an automaton, no matter what you're told. Like that's what ChatGPT is doing. ChatGPT isn't turning around and saying, hey, Joe, that sounds kind of stupid, frankly. Why are you doing that? You, as a service provider, can do that. You can ask discovery questions. You can push back. You can talk strategy. And I would argue that as a service provider, you should do all of those things. You're also going to be tasked with probably maintaining what you do alongside of your clients. And perhaps ideally, if you want to climb the value chain in the org chart, even working with them to ascertain the value of what you've done. So we've created this thing that summarizes other summaries and what needle is this moving for us business wise, in less cartoonish fashion. Maybe if this were some kind of way that he was building to like let startups gather intel about their competitors, then he ought to be asking them how it's going. Has this intel proved valuable? Have you made business decisions with this intel? Should we do more of this? Should we scale it up? To actually kind of dig into that and see whether this is what in fact he needed or not. And that is something that a chatbot isn't going to do, however human seeming it might be. So I guess, the way I can summarize this is to say, I'm not trying to suggest that there isn't something fairly groundbreaking happening here. I actually have been using the bot myself to do all kinds of interesting things. Like I think at first I started to ask it about like vacation planning, like, hey, is there anywhere in like Northern Europe that blah, blah, blah. And I got some pretty good responses from it that, actually did serve to narrow down the field of what I was looking at. Likewise, I've at times used it to define or summarize things for me in ways that I found more digestible. And that is legitimately really cool. It would be even cooler if I was fully 100% sure that all of the stuff it was telling me was true, but that's a topic for another day. The fact of the matter is there are good use cases for it. Contract law is another one I could see, like read this contract and see if there's anything weird in here, So I can imagine all kinds of good use cases for it. I just can't imagine them replacing high-end, sophisticated professional services that you are delivering to your client. It seems inevitable or something, but really if you were to go in and start trying to actually do that, it would break down. I promise you. You are doing things for your clients that are not going to be replicated by this. And if you ever find yourself with something like this nipping at your heels, it means that you are doing something that is being commodified. And whether it was ChatGPT, whether it was lower priced competitors or just, FTEs that are doing the same thing in the market, whether it was frameworks or tools or other forms of automation, if you're so commodified that somebody could explain something to a bot and get what they needed from that explanation, then you are going to be put out of business by something soon anyway. And that's been true for at least as long as I've been in the professional world. So the thing to look out for here isn't ChatGPT if you're a programmer. The thing to look out for is whether you're doing something that can be that easily grokked by a guy like Joe and explained to somebody who is much cheaper than you. That is the thing to look out for before a bot comes for your job or your practice. So for those of you watching that have freelance programming practices, I wouldn't even really give a lot of thought to this as a replacement for your services. It may get to that eventually, but I think there are things that are probably closer on your heels, like Upwork competitors than chatbots. So hopefully that all makes sense. And I don't know, maybe gives you some peace of mind. And I will catch you all next time.